One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, glory, glory, glory. Oh.
Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon formed against, yes, glory is destined. Everyday women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all just ain't specific enough. One son died, the spirit is revisiting us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up. When it go down, we woman and man up. They say stay down, and we stand up. Shots, we on the ground, the camera panned up. King pointed to the mountaintop, and we ran up.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we...
I think that is an answer to that myth, and it is that time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. And I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme righteous in our nation, have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. And it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of the bad people and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. And so we must help time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do right.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We won't just have to be contrite for the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but it will be for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who say, wait on time." We are here because we know social progress doesn't come by happenstance, and it surely won't come from us being silent and indifferent. We are here today to learn how to combat the vitriolic words and violent actions that perpetuate hatred and move ourselves, our workplaces, and our communities towards racial justice. Words, or the lack thereof, play a critical role in shaping our understanding and are foundational in our ability to inspire change and move towards action. This summit is dedicated to providing an understanding of language and how, when the right words spoken at the right time, can put us on the path towards racial equity. My name is Jaleesa Dawkins, and I am the Director of Health Equity Promotion within the Center for Public Health Innovation at Columbus Public Health. Columbus Public Health and the Ohio State University's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusive Excellence Committee for the College of Public Health, with support from the Region 5 Public Health Training Center, are elated to have you join us for the 3rd annual Diversity and Health Equity Summit entitled Racial Equity Through Action and Learning, Talking the Talk. This month, we honor the first Americans by calling to the forefront and celebrating Native American culture and contributions. To that end, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I work and live has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, specifically the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandot, and Delaware nations. I honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this territory. And remember, this acknowledgement is the start. Ask yourself, how do I take action to support Native American communities? As many of you remember, last year's Health Equity Summit focused on laying the groundwork, giving context to the history of racism and health disparities among African Americans. This year's summit, we will look at the power of words, with the summit's subtitle being Talking the Talk. We will learn about appropriate language and tools to encourage impactful change when discussing race and racism. Now for some housekeeping items. We know it's Friday and we have some very busy social justice fighters on with us today. So we've built enough time to make sure that we wrap up by 12:30. So stick with us throughout the entire program if you can. If you would like to enable subtitles, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see live transcript. Select View Full Transcript. And this is a big one. Please rename yourself by selecting the 3 horizontal dots to the right of your picture and selecting Rename. If you don't know which picture is yours, go ahead and turn on that camera so that you can see yourself. Again, click the 3 horizontal dots at the top right, click Rename, and then go ahead and put your first, last name, and your gender pronouns. Mute yourself unless you are speaking, please. And again, engage with us with your camera on. This is especially important during the breakout sessions. Feel free to use emojis and the chat to ask questions of the presenters and engage with one another. For technical issues, send a direct message to technical support. Lastly, engage with us via social media. We'll be tracking Twitter and Facebook for the hashtags Talk the Talk 2021 and Health Equity Summit 21. We are happy to offer several continuing education credits to attendees. See the full list here. One important thing to note is if you are applying for CEs, you will need to attend the entire length of the event. You will also need to complete the participant evaluation and select the option that you are requesting CEs. For any questions, direct them to me and I will get you connected with the appropriate provider. Now I'd like to introduce 2 of our public health warriors, Dr. Mashika Roberts, the City of Columbus Health Commissioner, and Dr. Michael Bessetti, the Vice Dean of the College of Public Health at The Ohio State University, who will formally welcome you. After that, you will hear from my co-laborer for this summit, Dr. Daryl Hood, who's a professor and Dean's Fellow within the Division of Environmental Health Sciences at The Ohio State University. Now let's welcome Dr. Roberts.
Well, thank you so much, Jaleesa, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's surely my pleasure to see all of you here this morning at our Diversity and Health Equity Summit that Columbus Public Health is doing in partnership with the OSU College of Public Health. Again, thank you all so much for joining us and for your interest in this very important topic. Today's summit is an important one because it brings all of us together around this virtual table to highlight and talk about our work and to address racism and achieve health equity. The COVID-19 pandemic has definitely put a spotlight on the disparities that have existed in our community for a very long time. It's been a tough 20 months. But COVID-19 has reinforced something that we've known for a very long time. Health equity can only be achieved through the collective passion, efforts, and work of everyone. I mean, everyone in our community. So this work belongs to all of us, and it takes our collective action, learning, and talking the talk to bring this critical issue to the forefront where we can address it together. So that's why we're all here today. As many of you know, Mayor Ginther proclaimed racism a public health crisis in February of 2020, before the pandemic hit our community. And at that time, he charged Columbus Public Health with leading the way and confronting racism wherever and whenever it presents itself. Columbus Public Health accepted that challenge and opened the new Center for Public Health Innovation, which is working to increase life expectancy and raise the quality of life by reducing health disparities. Our innovative center is looking at the social determinants of health to provide data on how they decrease the years and the quality of life for our Black and Brown residents. They then recommend interventions to ensure that everyone, regardless of the color of their skin, has the same opportunities for good health. Our work was put on the spotlight during this COVID-19 pandemic, and it became more important than ever. For example, we focused our vaccination efforts on reaching Black and Brown communities who were under-vaccinated, yet more at risk for the consequences from COVID-19. To improve vaccination rates and protect communities of color, we remove barriers like transportation by taking the vaccine to vulnerable neighborhoods, trusted locations where residents felt comfortable going. We also provided the Vax for Cash incentive program, along with education and engagement to encourage more people of color to get vaccinated. This program has been very successful. To date, we've given almost $19,100 Visa cash cards to residents who might not otherwise have gotten the vaccine. In addition to these innovative efforts like this, the way we talk about racism and health equity is important too. And that's why we're all here today. So Columbus Public Health also has been educating our providers so they too can use the right language to discuss inequities. Today, our team seeks to support all service providers so that they understand the importance of having the right language to discuss racial inequality. Our goal is to help you have the language to effectively talk about racial equity and the tools you need to respond to situations that challenge it. We are pleased to have our partner at OSU College of Public Health join us in this effort and to provide the education that will benefit all of our organizations and the entire community. I want to thank all of you again for just being here, taking the time out of your schedules to learn and about this important topic of how you can help our community be so much better. Everything we all do to address racism and achieve health equity in our community is important. And now it is truly my pleasure to introduce our partner in this work, Dr. Michael Besesi, the Vice Dean of the OSU College of Public Health, who is here to share a few words of welcome. Vice Dean Besesi?
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Roberts. Appreciate those introductory remarks, and you're right on target. So good morning, everyone, and many thanks to each of you for joining us today for this Health Equity Summit focused on racial equity. In 2019, the Ohio State University College of Public Health partnered with Columbus Public Health to become an academic health department. This partnership is focused on leveraging each other's resources in the form of people, places, and things. It's an evolving partnership with the goal to elevate public health research, education, and applied practice. So indeed, this summit today represents one of hopefully many examples of our respective commitments to improve health and eliminate structural racism. For the College of Public Health, this commitment includes a very robust diversity, equity, and inclusive excellence committee and a new community of inclusion program to track and celebrate faculty, staff, and students as they complete applicable work to increase awareness and understanding relative to better address conscious and unconscious barriers to equity and inclusion. Most recently, as just one example, the College of Public Health was honored with a 2021 Health Professions Higher Education Excellence and Diversity Award for its ongoing commitment, especially during the past decade to present, to the evolving advancement of diversity, equity, inclusion through various initiatives, programs, student recruitment and retention efforts, as well as faculty and staff hiring efforts. So I'd simply want to say my sincerest thanks to all the faculty, all the staff members from both Columbus Public Health as well as the College of Public Health who developed this summit agenda today, all the hard work behind the scenes through implementation this morning. And equally so, again, I want to thank each of you for participating today and joining us for this important topic. Today is just one component of ongoing need, as Dr. Roberts alluded to, this education along this area of increasing and enhancing understanding, but more importantly, action, which is in the title here today relative to racial equity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bassesi. And I'm Daryl Hood, and I work with Mike Bassesi over at the College of Public Health at The Ohio State University. I'm an environmental public health scientist, just one of many. And as has been indicated, we have a great program for you today. And before we hear from Mindy Fullilove, who will educate us and share some of her lifelong perspectives with respect to racial equity, we are also going to hear from Fran Gerbic and Bobby Persinger, particularly on the role that prevention plays in terms of addressing racism. Fran is the executive director of Prevention Action Alliance, and Bobby is the deputy executive director at Prevention Action Alliance. And so towards that, and we have indicated that the program today is very interactive. And just in a second or so, we're going to launch a poll. And so please take care. It's the pre-test for today's activity. And we'd like for everyone to respond accordingly. And now, with regard to the keynote speaker, we are more than privileged to have with us today a good friend. Oh, the poll, yes. Okay, 1 minute for the poll. Everybody, please take care too. Wow, yes, this is extraordinary. The interactive analytics are right here in front of us, and we are seeing that everyone is responding. Thank you very much. Yes, we want to share those. Okay. This is very good. And this sort of exudes and brings into the forefront where we all are with respect to the timeline and with regard to diversity and inclusion. Everyone's at a different place, and I think that this is indicative of that particular reality. Very good. Thank you. And so, yes, this is, you're looking on the screen at Mindy Thompson Fullilove. She's a good friend and a leader in her area. She's a social psychiatrist and professor of urban policy at the New School. She completed her BA at the world-renowned and prestigious Bryn Mawr College. That's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or Bryn Mawr, as we call it. And then she went and continued her education with an MS and MD degree from Columbia University. She is board certified in psychiatry after, of course, completing her residency at the New York Hospital, Westchester Division. Right now, she's a professor of urban policy and health at the New School. Mindy is very well published with over 100 scientific papers and 8 books, some of which she'll share the content from today, I'm sure. And this includes her highly regarded urban restoration trilogy, Root Shock, Urban Alchemy, and Main Street. And so without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Fullilove.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with so many people. It's great. I would like to share my screen. So Daryl said that, you know, the challenge for today was talking the talk. He mentioned that I'm a social psychiatrist, but you know, psychiatrists, they always have to make everything difficult. So because sometimes, at least in medicine and sometimes in public health, people get very formulaic. They're like, oh, we have to, talk more. We have to talk to each other. And therefore, here's a list of words, here's how you do it. And so I'm a psychiatrist. Communication is not formulaic. Communication is a process. So I just really wanted to get a little bit deeper about, what talking, and why is this important? I'm a subscriber to the New Yorker, and this is the issue that arrived yesterday, and it had this glorious cover, and it's called Crossing the Divide, and it's a riff on Washington crossing the Delaware. I live in New Jersey, so this is a big thing for us because he crossed from Pennsylvania into New Jersey for the Battle of Trenton, which we won very importantly in the American Revolution. But as opposed to everybody pulling together and getting across the Delaware, everybody's fighting. And clearly there's no good communication going on in that boat. And if we think about our boat of America, there's not really very good communication going on at this point. In fact, it's quite scary how bad the communication is. So two things came to mind in this talking the talk. And in a way, they're a little bit opposite. One was the thing that we used to say on the playground, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. For some reason in childhood, at least when I was a child, there was a lot of name calling, but we always said this, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's not exactly true because words, of course, do hurt. But on the other hand, it's not getting your bones broken. But the opposite is sort of the saying, them's fighting words, which of course was in all the cowboy movies we watched when I was young. And so the idea that there's a word that you have to fight is also out there, which is quite the opposite. So some words we have to fight over because they're so dangerous or hurtful or in some way, we can't let it pass. So I find these kind of important things about talk, that talk, it leads to fights and that talk can't hurt. So it's important to say, so, what are we saying about talk? This idea that there's right speech is very popular right now. And how do I know? I know because the American Medical Association and the Association of Medical Colleges weighed in on right speech in their Advancing Health Equity, a guide to language, narrative, and concepts. So this is an important pamphlet that they put out and has lots of guidance about how to speak correctly. So, if we look at just in this first page, instead of, these are things we're not supposed to say anymore. Marginalized communities, hard to reach, underserved, underprivileged, disadvantaged, high risk, at risk, high burden. Instead, we're supposed to say that groups that have been socially marginalized, groups that have been historically marginalized or made historically vulnerable, to make it clear that it's not that there's something wrong with the people, but that there are processes that put people at risk. So it's a very dense set of lists, and I highly recommend everybody reading it because it is useful for people in public health and medicine to be in leadership and to try to model how to talk in ways that are respectful of all people. But insisting that there's a right word, I think, is something that we have to problematize a little bit, because conversation is about exchange. And in having conversations, we really model the equity that we're trying to get to. So if I say something to you and I listen to you and you listen to me, then that's the equity that is really the goal of our work, of what we're trying to get to. My grandson is a songwriter. I believe he's a genius. It could be because I'm the grandmother. So he was playing a song for us. Actually, he wasn't playing a song for us because it was very explicit. But he said, this is what my generation is listening to. So one of his aunts didn't want to listen because she said she only likes songs where it's sort of a metaphor for sex. She said, I want plausible deniability that what I heard was about sex. In Javi's song, this particular song we were discussing, there was no plausible deniability. But Javi played it for an adolescent psychiatrist who was visiting, who listened to the song and said that was cool. And so each person is creating a relationship with Javi, but what are they creating? So when the aunt says, I don't want to listen to a sexually explicit song, when the adolescent psychiatrist listens and says that was cool, what is it that they open up or close down? This, I think, is the question that we have to ask. And both are legitimate choices, but they have consequences. And so as we're talking the talk, as we're learning to talk the talk, what are we trying to talk about and with whom? So that's what I think is at the heart of the problem that is on the table for our nation. We're a nation that has lost the capacity to talk. So if we're going to talk, it's not simply about a list of right words. It's got to be about some process of exchange in which we speak and we listen. So talk requires speaking and listening, both of which are complicated acts. How do I speak clearly? How do I speak in a way that you understand? A young man called me up the other day and was talking to me about his academic project. And I'm an academic, but I had no idea what he was talking about. So he wasn't speaking in a way that I could understand. And imagine somebody who wasn't even as close to academia as I am. But then there's also listening. How do we listen? How do we quiet our own internal voice and hear what the person is saying? That thing that I do, many other people do, I'm preparing my really great rejoinder, like as soon as she stops, I'm going to say, I'm not really listening to the person. But when I can listen, which is often a task I have to do with my grandson because I'm on the Javi Becoming a Great Songwriter team, I have to listen to what he's trying to say in these songs. That requires being quiet and being open to what's on his mind. Talk is impeded by policing language. Now, this is true across all power structures. There is nothing that's going to stop a conversation more surely than you can't speak to me like that. Because then you have to fight about what can be said and what can't be said. And so the issue of who has the power to say what can be said and what can't be said, these are important questions in a country where power is not shared equally and where the struggles are struggles for power. And the question that we have to ask ourselves as we meet someone and as we start to talk to them is, what are our goals? You may want to enforce certain behaviors, including choice of words. That may be your goal. Or you may want to have an exchange and build a relationship. The two can be mutually exclusive. And so you have to walk the line very carefully and be very clear about what you're trying to make happen. So one of the major experiences I've had recently with, talk is a project that I worked on in a part of a coalition of organizations that started in 2016 and said to the nation, we believe that the nation should observe the anniversary of Jamestown, which in 1619 is where Africans landed and were sold into bondage. So we took a stance. We called people to observe. Now, a call is simply that. We just said, this is an event, we call you to observance. The choice of responding or not is up to the people and the people that are reached. So did people hear us call? And if they heard us call, what did they decide to do? So ultimately, more than 150 observances were held that we knew of. We know, of course, there were hundreds or thousands of others observances during that very momentous year. But the ones that we were connected to ranged from a concert at Carnegie Hall to dedicated church services. People used outdoor events, dance, and solemn occasions to mark the anniversary. Each group followed its own process in deciding what to do. That was important to us. We didn't want to say, there is an anniversary and this is what you should do. We just said, this is an anniversary and anniversaries are important. This anniversary of 1619 is embodied in the DNA of our nation. How is it in the DNA where you live or where you work or where you join together? But each group that decided to participate followed its own process in deciding what to do. And that process involved a lot of conversation. So that was a whole fascinating experience to watch. And we were very happy that quite a number of the groups, after they finished, were willing to talk to us about what they had thought and what they did. We have, of course, a website called 400 Years of Inequality, which is where we talk about which was the core website of the project while we were making this call. But we also did a new website called A Call Answered, which is about organizations responding to the call and the remarkable things that happened. It was a very moving year and quite extraordinary what people wanted to say. So I want to show you a little bit about how this website is set up and how people thought about this. So I'm going to leave that screen, and I think you can still see my share. I am now sharing a tremendous question for this 400th anniversary, is how our cities are planned and designed. How can they be used to liberate people from all forms of oppression? A question posed by Ifeoma Igbo, who's an architect and member of the National Organization of Minority Architects. And if you can't see that screen, would somebody please unmute and say, we don't see that? Because I can't read the chat. But I'm assuming everybody can see it.
We can see it.
Oh, thank you so much. Very reassuring. So the way this was set up was to tell a story. This website was to tell a story based on interviews with people who were involved, and also filming that we did at the event. So this organization, two organizations, the National Organization of Minority Architects and Black Space Urbanist Collective, worked together to put on this event called Believe the Hype, a global collective of industry change agents. And they held this at Weeksville Heritage Center in Brooklyn. And this is an extraordinary place. And they invited high school students from a nearby high school, Mott Hall Bridges Academy, to join them at the site and to have a day of learning about architecture and landscape architecture, and engaging around sort of the history of Black people through the history of this place. Black Space said, we push ourselves so we may realize a future where Black people, Black spaces, and Black culture matter and thrive. Now, in this decision that the groups would work together, that they would invite Mott Hall Bridges Academy, and that they would hold it at Weeksville Heritage Center, this is all emerges from several months of conversation and reflection. And then what would they do there? That too was several months of conversation and reflection. And our collective at the 400 Years of Inequality Project was involved. So we heard some of what they were thinking about. It was very careful. There was a lot of listening and speaking and consideration and reflection and back and forth. It was very respectful and very open. And this is the process of talk. When we're planning something deeply important, that people in a way, many of the conversations that we heard, people got very quiet, because this was about the ancestors, and how do we honor the ancestors, and how do we honor the ancestors in a particular place that carries the traces of their lives. And that was what they were planning to have happen. So they went to this extraordinary place, and they actually had architects who had worked on this. And let me say a little bit about Weeksville, that it was a free Black community started in the 1840s in Brooklyn, and it was actually sort of in a way lost, except there was a pilot who was flying over, I think a couple decades ago, and noticed the traces of it from the air. And then they went and found it. And there were some of the houses from this 1840 community were still there, and they have been restored. And then a beautiful interpretation center was built. And so it's this Weeksville Heritage Center. So it's an extraordinary story. Part of this project of documentation is just interviewing people for their voices. I'm just going to play you a little bit of what Elizabeth Kennedy had to say. And if all works well, I think you'll be able to hear it. And Julissa, you'll let me know if not. And maybe it's not going to work. You never quite know with these things.
We cannot hear it.
Yeah, I don't hear it either. So we'll just skip that.
But if you reshare and share your sound, then we will be able to.
I did share my sound. I'm good on that trick, but that might have just required a different trick. But let's try this, okay? So these are the kids you can see in this gorgeous photo who had this wonderful day of listening to architects and landscape architects, of exploring the space, and of doing a thing called the 5 senses scavenger hunt, which is using all of your senses to go around a place and engage with it. So what you're going to hear is Ifoma Ibo explaining the 5 senses scavenger hunt, and then you're going to see the kids doing some of the phases of it, and then coming back and reading from their poems, which is part of the thing. And I hope this works. Just so you know, this is a drone taking a photo of the place, and this is what the pilot saw. Not all of the new buildings. So we're not hearing sound, so maybe I'll stop the share and try again. Reshare and see if that helps.
We still can't hear the sound.
I agree. I don't hear it either.
If you share the individual tab, the sound should come through.
I'm sorry, if I share the individual tab?
Not the whole window. If you share that one tab of Google Chrome.
If I share that one tab of Google Chrome. That sounds brilliant, but I'm not sure I know what that is. Do you want to? Can you explain it slightly?
If you would have to exit and then reshare the window, and it'll ask you if it wants the full screen or a specific page or something like that.
Stop the share. And then reshare the window.
When you press share screen, are there multiple options?
There are many windows that it's offering me.
So find the one that video's on specifically, and that's not your whole computer screen, and click on that one.
Yeah, that's what I had done, and it's not working. That's okay. What's important is that they are moving around in this space and having all these adventures. So they're doing a rubbing, and they're going to so you see, they're going in all these different spaces and doing rubbings. So it allows them to just touch the space and be together in it. So they're going into these historic houses and looking at the things, and then they're writing a poem. So this young woman wrote a poem to the dresser that she saw in one of the houses, like, "You hold my clothes and I have a mirror." And then they did design. What do you think an ideal Black space design is? So this was the way in which the Architects Collective, this national organization, Minority Architects and Black Space, had thought this is a way to think about the 400 years of inequality. And this is where they're standing for 60 seconds and everybody is facing the sun. So that's a 5 senses scavenger hunt that everybody enjoyed and joined in. And I'm sorry you can't hear the sound, but when you visit the site on your own, you will be able to see the sun. And I want to talk about the second one, which was an Inwood candlelight vigil, which is also an example of people talking to each other. So Sarah Townley is somebody that I've worked with for a long time in another project that we did in Northern Manhattan called Climb, City Life is Moving Bodies. She's a community member and a member of her church. And she said racism is a spiritual crisis. It's counter the wholeness of creation permeating every part of life. And so she was having a coffee with another friend in the neighborhood and talking about the 400 Years of Inequality Project. And they decided to get involved. And one of the things that they learned was that there had been a slave burial ground in the neighborhood. And that when there was a subway being built, that the grave was just dug up, and the order from the city was that this grave be just moved as quickly as possible so as not to hold up the city. This was in 1900. So they're learning together, they're working as a team, they were reading together, and they were being place-based. this is the talk, the sort of how might we, living in Inwood, which is at the very tip of Manhattan, the northern tip of Manhattan, how do we address this issue of the 400 years of inequality? Where is it in our neighborhood? And so this discovery that there had been this burial ground that was so directly desecrated was stunning to them. And as they learned this story, they thought it was incredibly important to call together people of different faith traditions to pay homage to the ancestors that had been harmed in this way. And so they, Sarah's coming from the Catholic Church, other people were coming from other interfaith, other faith traditions. And so they, and then they kept studying. So they found this in the New York Times. The dread of an uprising of Blacks in 1722 prompted an act providing that all Negroes and Blacks be buried by daylight. The act was amended afterward so that not more than 12 Negroes should attend a funeral. The penalty for the violation of this statute was a public flogging. Furthermore, the slave was to be buried without any outward signs of grief or any ceremonial tokens, such as a pall, gloves, or flowers. So this is I think an important piece of the process, that the talk becomes thinking about the place. And then in thinking about the place, there are plenty of ways in which you can think about the place and learn about it, learn more. This was not something that they knew when they started about this history of people being unable to mourn the people that they had lost. So the idea of this candlelight vigil that would be in honor of the people who had been buried there, so it would be public and many people would come, was really directly speaking to this New York City law that this couldn't happen. To say, no, this will happen and we will do it. We will be the mourners for all the people who died here while enslaved. So as they learned more and more artifacts, I think the conversation, as I have heard it from them, became deeper and more interesting, and they became more deeply committed. And so they went that night, they picked a night for a candlelight vigil. And if you have a chance to go to the site, you can see some photos of the vigil. And we have also posted the remarks of Rabbi Guy Austrian, who is the Fort Tryon Jewish Center, which is in that neighborhood, speaking about the meaning of the desecration of graves. So then you see other people, what they had to say. So what culminates from the conversation, how might we think about 400 years of inequality? How might we think about this anniversary of Jamestown in our neighborhood? And what comes from that is this truly international ceremony of in honor of ancestors at that particular spot in that neighborhood. This is not at all the imposition of right speech. This is people learning about their place, talking to each other, thinking through what would be right, what can we offer to the ancestors, and in that coming up really with a spiritual response to a spiritual crisis. This is much deeper than simply saying, here's a list of words you shouldn't use, and here's a list of words you should use. This is real conversation, and it's transformative. These were all people who were kind and important, concerned about these issues before this, but they certainly become more knowledgeable, more deeply committed, better activists as a result of this. It's quite an extraordinary story, and it's been wonderful to not only hear about what they did and what they went through and what they learned, but to see how they continued their activism. Of course, on the heels of this was, as we all know, 2019 was followed by 2020. And so the activists of the 400 Years of Inequality Project founded a racial justice group and have gone on to do all kinds of organizing around the COVID pandemic. So it was a very important, and it's very important that groups that have talked together and that have learned to respect each other and that have done something together and that have deepened their bonds, they have the capacity to take on the next thing. And so that's extraordinary and important. And the real, I think, discovery here is that the capacity to do the next right thing comes not from a list of words, but from this much slower and longer process of speaking to one another and listening to one another. This is quite the hard work. So in some words are fighting words, and we're going to fight about some words, and that's going to happen. And the control of speech is about power. So saying I can't say something, it cuts two ways. You have to say this to me. You can't say that to me. That there are times when I'm going to say you don't have that control over me. I'm going to fight you about that. I have the right to speak my mind. I have a right to use the words that I want to use. And other people are going to fight me. If I say to Javi, you can't use that in a song, he's going to fight me. So no, that's how we talk. That's what we're talking about. It's like, okay. But when my brother, who's also a songwriter, says to him, Javi, the way to do this is that there's an explicit song, and then there's a song that can go on the radio, and everybody does this. And then Javi hears that from an artist that he respects, where he knows the explicit version, and then he hears the popular version. He says, oh, I can do that. So in many ways, the longer process of change has to go on and has to involve speaking and listening. We can't always be fighting with each other. And at this point in the United States, we're fighting way too much and listening way too little. So the search here is, what is it that we need to talk about? And I think that the larger work of this project, which is to say that we have health disparities, we have people dying way too young, people having a great deal of pain and misery in their lives because they're poor, because they're Black, because they're brown, because they've worked at terrible jobs, for all the reasons that we have health disparities. And then for the larger reason that if you have a country with terrible inequality, everybody's health suffers. So the richest people in the country have worse health than they would have if we had more equality in our country, which seems paradoxical, but it's what the data shows. So that's what we have to talk about, is how might we have a healthy country? We don't agree about that, but that's what we have to talk about. And until we get some openness, some ability to speak, some ability to listen, we will just be fighting. And I don't think we're going to have the kind of deep connectedness that's going to allow us to care for each other, to have solidarity. But we do have deep shared problems. And so if we can actually speak and listen to each other, we will be able to hear what those problems are and to think about solutions. So, that's what psychiatrists do. We just reflect on things and we don't tell you what to do. But well, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you do that, that's what's going to happen. And what do you want to do? So talking is great. And I've now done enough talking, and I think I'm going to stop. And thank you very much for listening. My storytelling teacher always says that we tell a story into the bowl of your listening. And I hope you visit the website, just so you see it, of the 400 Years of Inequality Project. Believe the Hype, a call answered.org. Believe the Hype is the story about Noma, and the Candlelight Vigil is also on that website. So thank you so much. And I'm going to stop my screen share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fullilove. I would like to open the floor for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
I was so clear. Who could have a question?
That was absolutely amazing, Dr. Fullilove. Thank you so much. And the part that resonated for me, it was based from the vigil. And coming from a family of Presbyterian ministers and an interfaith sort of upbringing, I think that you really hit it out of the park. in terms of talking about people learning together. This is a continuum. It's going to be a slow process. And we can't let you get away without giving us your sort of examples of the resources and where to start. Where would you, the best source in terms of the compilation of resources to start, where would you sort of direct us and guide us? Where can we find that info other than your website?
Well, I wanted to highlight the website because it's about people who talk to each other. About a tough question: how do we honor the ancestors? And if we can honor the ancestors, we can honor ourselves. So I think their stories are beautiful and different. What's important is that they were all place-based. They were about what is the story of your place, not what's the story of my place or what's some general story, but what's the story of your place and can you tell it? And there are many, many, many. How many stories are there in America? There, so many stories we don't know, like people didn't know about that burial ground. And then how much are we enriched as we start to know those stories? So that's why I thought the website is enriching. And I think that, just as the AMA and the AAMC, and I'm sure you have that booklet about equity through language, are starting to think about, lots of people are starting to think about this, correct speech, right speech. I'm just trying to say that we really have to talk to each other and that's hard. And one of the greatest resources on the problems of talking, especially across power divides, is the linguist Deborah Tannen, who has written about women speaking to men and, women speaking to their mothers, all kinds of divides that we have to cross. And the more we know how we get hung up at particular divides, the more we can really start to think about, okay, therefore, let's think about that. But really the deep question is, are we just trying to dictate right speech, or are we trying to talk to each other? But sometimes we're trying to do one and sometimes we're trying to do the other. And that's not something where I can say the resource is this. I don't know what one's goals are. We have to pause for a moment and say, what are my goals in this situation? It's a very important question. Like with teenagers, what are the goals? You just want them to clean up their room, or do you actually want to have a relationship? I always just wanted them to clean up their room, and it didn't go very far. So
we have 10 minutes left in this segment, by the way.
Great.
Great. So I will ask one of the questions from the chat. One says, can you speak to the way social media plays into what you're saying?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, right? Like, what is social media doing to our speaking and listening? Social media is, of course, it's like yelling, like going in the middle of the street and yelling. And it's because it's not a conversation. Although somebody replies, it's just they go in the middle of the street and scream, and then somebody else goes in the middle of the street and screams. But it's not a conversation at all. It doesn't have the capacity to be a conversation. So it is really reinforcing the divides, I think, in our country. So I yell, I agree with her. Somebody else yells, I agree with him. And so the sort of bringing the energy down in the room, and can we just calm down a little bit and talk to each other? That gets lost in social media. So I think it's aggravating our divides, and it's not useful for problem solving. It is useful for yelling, and sometimes we all want to yell. I should only speak for myself. Sometimes I want to yell. It's possible that all of you in Ohio don't do that. It's possible.
Thank you.
You yell too.
So the next question says, they love the guidance about being place-based. Can you speak more about the ways in which we can do this?
Yeah, I think being place-based is fundamental, because we are, as human beings, place-based. I've been studying the psychology of place since really about 1994, and so we have to occupy some space in the world, and then we get it organized. So I'm on Zoom. You can see this is my home office, so you can see it's just full of like things like you can see on that side. there's like a trophy, I got an award, and the fan is from my 50th college reunion, and the giraffe is because the Climb Project, what we made is Giraffe Path. So if you come into my place, you could learn all about me, because these are the artifacts of my life. And you could see on that side, no, on that side, I don't really have a clean desk. So you know all about me, right? Because you came to my office. That's what place is for all of us. So where's your hospital? Where's your house? What are the stories? And these stories are shared places, never made by one person alone. And so it's that way that we begin to understand community and to clarify, what are our intentions? How do we want to live together? What do we believe in? Solidarity? What are we trying to do? So that's I think why place is so important, because it reveals so much. So if we stop and look, we can learn so much. And don't send me your psychoanalysis of me, please. Just pretend it was all good.
Thank you. So the next question, this person mentions that, we all learn to speak and communicate as infants, but not all of us learn to effectively communicate. So can you explain your interpretation of what it means to talk and communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I think that, I think what shuts down communication, many things can shut down communication, but it's often power. I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to respect you for whatever reason. So parents do this to their kids, older children do it to younger children, white people do it to Black people. So at many levels of our society, we have models of not listening. We get preached at. All kinds of teachers teach at us. I am talking at you. So many models of hierarchy, and the hierarchy means that if I'm on top, I get listened to. If I'm on the bottom, I don't get listened to. So fundamentally, communication is impeded structurally. So partly, how do you communicate means actually you step out of that structure and you say to somebody else, I see the light of God in you and I'm going to listen to you. That's fundamentally the disruption that we're talking about. It was a very, very deep disruption to listen to another human being, actually listen. And as Marie Nossel, my storytelling teacher, always says, we have the bowl of our listening. And then the story that gets told is told into the bowl of our listening. So imagine if you just open the bowl of your listening to another human being, what will be given to you. So it's so exciting to communicate with people, and it's so unexciting just to be powerful. I mean, it's a little bit thrilling, but it's dead end. There's no exchange in power. There's only exchange in listening.
We got about 3 minutes left in this segment.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll try to fit in at least one or two more questions. So the next one is, what is your perspective on the impact or role of setting norms or rules of engagement for tough conversations?
Well, I'm a family therapist, and sometimes you have to set rules of engagement for tough conversations. But the rule of engagement is never only one person is right. And so what makes a tough conversation really tough is that somebody doesn't want to listen to the other person. So, partly when I'm making rules as a family therapist for tough conversations, it's always about how to help people listen. So that's my thought. In America, we don't know how to listen because that's not what our culture is about. Our culture is about shouting at this point. So getting people to listen is the tough norm that we have to enforce, I believe.
Agreed. And speaking of norms, like social media, does the virtual environment we live in create a similar reduced capacity for true communication? So for example, does email reduce our capacity to converse?
That is a really good question. I've just been part of a complicated conversation on email, and one email caused a lot of people to be upset, and then there was back and forth. Email is not exactly like social media. There's more ability to exchange on email. But it's not like being in person. It's not like you can look somebody in the eye and say, oh, when I said that, did you think I didn't mean that. There's not, it's much, sort of, it's asynchronous. So we don't have that capacity to just fix things in the moment. So it's not at all like face to face, and we all have to be very careful with email. And that rule, if you're mad, write the email and then don't send it for 48 hours. And then 48 hours later, put it in the trash. That's a good rule.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for just one more. Someone said, I agree with conversations taking place against power divides. It would be interesting to hear some ideas on approaching these sorts of conversations.
Well, it depends which side you're on. And we're always in those conversations across power divides, right? And so a lot of people have written about the powers of the weak. If you're a woman in conversation with a man, how do you handle it so that you have some power? And we are brought to mind of Scheherazade. Scheherazade, this king his wife cheated on him. He was mad at all women, so he would sleep with a woman and have her beheaded in the morning. And Scheherazade put herself forward to marry him, and then told him a story. And the story was so fascinating, he let her live so he could hear the next story. By the time this had gone on for 1001 nights, he was so in love, and they lived happily ever after. So that's powers of the weak. She could tell a story and save women. So we all have powers. We have to know what they are, and use them as cleverly as we can. There's a lot of wonderful fairy tales about the clever girl. Scheherazade is a clever girl, and how she manages the situation. So we're always working within constraints when we're on the bottom of a power dynamic, and we're trying to be the clever girl.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Fully-Love. I don't see any other questions in the chat at this time.
Amazing. Amazing.
Certainly, we certainly want to thank you very much, Mindy, Dr. Fully-Love. And parting thoughts, if you could just, sort of solidify everything down, what would be your parting thought to the collective here? This is your chance. You have 264 people.
I just want to say I've been on a lot of Zooms over the past year and a half, and but I don't think I ever got to talk to 264 people. So I just want to say, whatever you're doing, could you put it in a bottle and sell it to the rest of us? Because we need to be able to get 264 people to come to a conversation about equity. And I know that the other speakers are going to just really have tons of great advice. So could you please sell us your secret for getting people to come? And thank you all so much. I feel so honored that you listened to me so early in the morning. It was really a great pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you. And we know you have a class to get to. So
I do.
Yes. So if we can use the reactions to thank Dr. Fully-Love. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Right. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Fully-Love. Thank you for everybody who put questions in the chat. We're going to be talking and listening throughout the day. So, but now we get to transition to our first breakout session, and we have about 35 minutes to break up into smaller groups, and we have more than 24 volunteers from both Columbus Public Health and OSU serving as our facilitators today. So each room will have a facilitator who will be leading the conversation, and we'll be reviewing and discussing 3 questions. So this is a wonderful time to put Dr. Fully-Love's advice to work, and whether it's creating a bowl to listen, whether it's understanding that we can't move to the next step unless we're ready to talk, but more importantly, listen. So our facilitators will lead the conversation through 3 questions and be taking notes. Once the breakout room sessions are over, we'll be capturing some of those key points in our first Jamboard for the first 3 questions, and We'll have a large group discussion after that and go over some of the remarks. Everybody here will be automatically entered into a breakout room. So once you see an invitation to join a breakout room, please click accept. In addition to the facilitators, there are several of our planning staff that will be available for tech support, to answer questions, to make sure the facilitators have everything they need. And I just encourage you to approach these conversations openly, with your best listening, opportunities for the people who want to share. And we do encourage, in the breakout rooms, if you are comfortable with it, please have your camera on and please be willing to share your thoughts.
Okay, it looks like most of our participants are back. Jennifer, you can go ahead and take over.
Yes, thank you all so much for responding to those questions. Thank you, facilitators, for supporting your participants and having the discussion. We want to talk a little bit about some of the highlights from each of those discussions. So I want to invite our facilitators to think about the nuggets, the things that seem to resonate in particular with your group members, and be prepared to share those with us. I have a couple that I've jotted down.
No.
I was not able to, I'm sorry, Dr. Hood, did you want to add something? Okay. I was not able to get to each group, but I will share just to get us started, but I am going to ask for each of our facilitators to jump in with your highlights and the topics that were particularly resonant among the members of your groups. I was in one of the sessions with group number 5, and I believe they were discussing question number 2. So we'll start there because this was particularly interesting, and their discussion regarding phrases that and expressions that create or enforce division in racial groups. And they talked about the Black Lives Matter phrase being triggering, as well as slavery and words like minoritized and underserved. And there was some really interesting perspectives around that. Would you all, anyone from Group 5, like to chime in regarding that discussion and share it with the rest of the group?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Rihanna. I was the facilitator for this group. I'll kind of give a brief overview of those phrases that we chose. So with the Black Lives Matter phrase, as some of you may think of it as, oh, why did we choose that phrase? But if you think of it from a different perspective, it's kind of saying that one group is more important than the other. And that can be very triggering to some people and cause division within that racial group as well. With the term slavery that we also used, it was said, Byron, he was in our group, and he brought up how we still have occurring issues with that term and how there are just still ramifications to slavery overall. So that word can also just kind of cause division within the racial groups. With the terms underserved and minorities, which we talked about a lot, is how, like, why do we even use those terms? Why do we label those people? And if we didn't label them as minorities or underserved people, will we be at an equilibrium? Will we all look at each other as the same? We wouldn't look at them as different. That's kind of just a brief overview.
Thank you. And Dr. Fullalove made the point during her discussion that there have been discussions about not using the terms minoritized or marginalized. And I know that Group 5 also discussed that and expressed that it can be triggering. And I captured a note from one of the participants who indicated that these labels are triggering, and I know that I'm minoritized, but I also know that it's not a level playing field, but I'm on the field. Any other group leaders want to respond with their group's responses to question number 2 about phrases and expressions that create or enforce divisions?
So this is Jennifer Hefner. I'm from Group 13, and I just wanted to add very quickly that we thought of this slightly different, and not in terms of like a specific phrase, but types of things that people do that can create divisions. And we talked about othering a group, like saying your people or those people. It can really create divisions quickly among a group of people.
Thank you, Jennifer. I believe it was Group 1 that was also discussing that.
Awesome.
That othering is very shuts down conversations. So I see in room 8, they talked about light-skinned, high yellow boys versus men described by physical features, good hair and bad hair, those people. Are those also responses to question number 2? Group 8.
Yes, those were responses to question number 2 as well. The phrases that often used to create division within a race.
Thank you. So let's go back to question number 1. How do we talk about race and racism to those who may be unfamiliar or uncomfortable with the topic? There was some really good discussion in group number 3 about that topic. And what I captured was a white person being a true advocate cannot always be kind or gentle. Group 3, can you talk a little more about that?
Hi, I think that was me. So yeah, I was in group 3. I'm Shelby Dawkins. I work at the James Center for Cancer Health Equity. Our conversation really kind of stemmed from Ashley Whitaker kind of kicked off with like a no judgment zone. And then we kind of engaged in a space of, as the 3 white individuals who were in the room, is how do we go into our spaces and be impactful and understanding that sometimes we have to come professional and matter of fact with candor and truth. And not worry so much about, are we going to hurt anyone's feelings in the words that we're using, but making sure that, we continue to use professional voices in our professional spaces. But sometimes that doesn't always come around the tone in which you use your voice, but what you're saying and the meaning behind the words that you're using. So sometimes tone is used for impact, but the intention needs to be clear around what the truth of the situation behind racism and how it impacts our systems and our organizations.
Thank you. What highlights do other groups have for that question 1 regarding setting the tone for conversation?
Hi, my name is Misty. We're group 9, and out of our conversation, some of the points we really focused on were that it's important to talk about racism as a systemic issue, and that can be more productive in some conversations than making it an individualized issue. Another perspective that I thought was really interesting was, if you are in a professional setting, for example, in a meeting, and one person says something that is racially insensitive or that you find inappropriate, that it can be more helpful to take them aside after the fact rather than to call them out in front of the group. And a kind of an overarching sentiment in our discussion was about just having the courage to have the conversation, even if you feel like it's uncomfortable and you'd rather avoid it. So, thanks.
Thank you, Misty. I see that Scott and Elizabeth have raised their hands to comment. Let's start with you, Scott, and then Elizabeth.
Sure, and I think Allison also has her hand raised too. I can go. Room 28 is where we were. There were some really good points that have already been brought up, so I won't repeat those. But calling out sessions like this that give people the tools to have those conversations are really important, because we can want to do it well, but having the tools to do it well it is important. And we've been conditioned not to talk about it, so we've got an uphill battle to go there. And equally the challenge, not just a willingness to talk about it, but a willingness to listen, and to listen with an empathetic view. And that having these conversations with people we know and know well, it's much easier to have these conversations, but having these conversations in a big group full of people you don't know is much more challenging. And when you look at our social networks that we all have, both digital and in real life, they're very segregated by race and political views. So it can be hard to have a conversation that is challenging with people who may have different views than you, because we don't spend time with people who are different than us and have different views than us. So again, another uphill battle to climb that makes these conversations even more challenging. So I'll stop there and let others go.
Thanks, Scott. And to your point, I think this came out in another one of the rooms, is that in our organizations, how are we measuring the progress that we're making around having difficult conversations about race? How do we benchmark? So I think that's a challenge that many organizations continue to have. Perhaps with our next summit, we can talk about some strategies associated with that. Okay, we're going to go to Elizabeth, and then Allison, Tara, and Debbie.
All right, thank you so much. I was the facilitator for room 12, and we talked about how you can explain the concept of race to someone who is not white, essentially. And one of the ways to explain it is calling it a performance that you never asked for, and talking about who is a threat, giving some examples like being an open carry state here in Ohio, but who is actually able to open carry and why, what that looks like. And then we also had a conversation about having conversations like this can be tricky unless you find a common ground. Once you find a common ground, you have a point to be able to start. So maybe we can't have a conversation about that constant performance, but we can have a conversation about a shared experience and go from there. So sometimes having one of these tricky conversations is actually a series of conversations that starts with some common ground and can grow from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Our group talked about the idea of that many people are miseducated about the histories of others in our country. People who aren't in their own group, they're miseducated about the histories of people who are not themselves. And so developing personal relationships so that you can share with people true things about history and teach the truth as a way to guiding people to a new understanding, and that those things do work better in a place of patience and of relationship building.
Thanks, Allison. Tara?
So we touched on a lot of the points that have been expressed before, but one really important thing we found in how we talk about race and racism with others is first recognizing our own inherent biases and our not right thinking, so being willing to be pulled up where we need to be pulled up, and not being a teacher, just being open to other people, and then finding that common space that came up with us, building relationships, and then having the ability to see people's perspective. Even if we don't agree with them, maybe trying to see where they're coming from. So those were some of our approaches to talking about racism. And some of the phrases we found, objectionable. We thought maybe we could adjust that conversation if we actually went to the groups where, that those terms are targeted towards, or maybe where they originated from, and seeking guidance in how we address and use those words. We talked about the words that, there are words I can't use and words that other people can use. So there's context and there's perspective in that language. And so I think we always just have to look to the people at the heart of the terms for guidance. And in terms of reframing or eliminating some of this, maybe just modeling it in our homes and with our young people, maybe in schools, having these conversations. Discerning the intent in someone's use of that language, maybe assuming innocence or ignorance in the beginning until they maybe prove otherwise. And then from there, taking the personal responsibility to pull people up. So that's kind of what I pulled out that's not been covered already.
We got about 5 minutes left in this segment.
All right, Debbie and Mike, we want to get you both in, so please share quickly.
Okay, so I'm Debbie and I was a facilitator in room 14. And actually this question out of the 3 generated the most conversation in my group. So I'm going to try and not share anything that's already been shared, but the pieces that really stuck out is just being really intentional in your conversation. And that I think someone said earlier, a large group can be a lot more problematic. And my group shared that one-to-one conversations are a much better way of sharing, and helping each other understand. Understanding resistance, I think that's huge, validating that some people are just not comfortable with these conversations, and at least validating it can kind of eliminate some of that resistance. Being humble, that's one I think for those of us who work at the health department, and obviously everybody else in the room, that's a big one. Acknowledging what you don't know, don't act like you know more than you do, because that can really put off other people. And also having a constant conversation, that it's not just a one-time piece that eliminates this, that it is an ongoing conversation that needs to be addressed on a regular basis.
Ongoing conversation. Thank you. Mike?
Yes, so I was the facilitator for room 25. We talked about a lot of the same things, particularly the importance of building relationships, and within that, and helping each other understand that we're all in this together, that we depend upon each other. Another thing, I'm not sure if this was brought up, but we talked about this as well, is that these discussions, it's helpful to not target individuals, but rather talk about the systems.
Thank you. I see on the Jamboard that a couple of other groups also emphasize that, to talk about the systems and to also pursue policies, was in the chat. Excellent reflections, everyone. Thank you. Continue to reflect on this during the break. That's where we are at this point. Is that correct, Todd?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, we are going to take a break for a few minutes. Everyone, thank you so much for your thoughts, your perspectives, and having your bowl open to listening, as Dr. Fuller-Love encouraged us. And we will see everyone back in 5 minutes.
So welcome back. My name is Makita Porter, and I am the Section Chief of Capacity Building within Columbus Public Health Center for Public Health Innovation. I have the pleasure of introducing you, let me take my mask off. I have the pleasure of introducing you to the second half of today's summit. We're living in a pandemic world, so I forgot I had the mask on. Our presenters are the Executive Director and Deputy Executive Director of Prevention Action Alliance. Prevention Action Alliance is a statewide prevention agency with a mission of leading healthy communities in the prevention of substance misuse and the promotion of mental health wellness. They, like all of us, want every child to grow up in a safe and healthy community that nurtures and supports them. Fran Gerbig is the Executive Director of Prevention Action Alliance. Among other duties, Fran represents the agency on state and local committees, boards, and coalitions, including but not limited to the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention Association of Ohio, the Recovery Ohio Head Start Work Group, the Governor's Ohio School Safety Working Group, and the Ohio MOS Prevention and Wellness Roundtable and Youth-Led Prevention Leadership Team. Bobby Persinger serves as the Deputy Executive Director. Bobby is responsible for programming, outreach, engagement, and strategic initiatives. Additionally, he leads the training team and development of the Matthew B. Schoonover Educational Center at Prevention Action Alliance. Fran and Bobby will provide the specific session objectives in their presentation. The overall objective of this workshop is to provide a space to have conversations and make prevention resources and information available so the conversations will continue. So without further ado, we welcome Fran and Bobby.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? The day has gone wonderfully so far, and we're really excited to have been able to hang out with everyone this morning. And we're more excited to really get our portion of the day underway. In prevention, we have a unique and interesting experience where we are, as scientists, we are practitioners. We like to talk about that practical application piece. And we're excited to share that with you today. Some of our thoughts and how prevention can play a role in addressing racism. I am going to share my screen and get Fran, are you on?
I am on, but I don't see myself, which honestly is not a problem. So there I am. So we are delighted to be here today. And I do thank Makita for those very nice introductions. It really is funny to be able to describe what you do during a day in 100 words or less. So she did that very well, and I thank her for that. I do want to provide you with just a little bit more information about our organization, though. We are a nonprofit. We are an Ohio certified prevention agency by the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and we are here in Columbus, Ohio. We like to say that we serve the people who are doing the work. We don't provide direct services, but we do provide a wealth of resources, training opportunities, grant opportunities for those practitioners, those prevention practitioners, as well as individuals in communities who are looking to make change in their communities. At Prevention Action Alliance, we like to say that everybody has a role in prevention, and we're really honored to serve the individuals. We're honored to serve the professionals who are doing this hard work. We recognize that prevention is something that can be done across the lifespan, and we work through a number of networks that we have at our organization to provide knowledge, skills, and abilities so that they can be the change agents in their communities. So we host and we sponsor the Statewide Prevention Coalition Association, which works with community coalitions across our state. We facilitate the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network, which works directly with young people, providing them skills and abilities, as well as the adults, we call them adult allies, that support the youth as they make that change, as they become catalysts. We also are the host and sponsor of the Ohio College Initiative, which works with colleges across the state, colleges and universities, as they look to support young people on their campuses. And during the pandemic, we have also transitioned this to support the caring adults and staff that are working with those young people. So it's an ever-growing and evergreen process. We are trying to be responsive. And one of, I think, the most important networks that we host is the GAP network. GAP stands for From Grief to Advocacy for Prevention. And it is really designed to work with those individuals who have suffered a loss, whether it be to overdose death, suicide, mental health diseases, helping those family members become advocates for prevention and be the voice of the lived experiences that they have. So we really are looking to, as I said, provide knowledge, skills, and ability, and empower people. I need to state that Prevention Action Alliance and prevention recognizes and underscores the belief that cultural diversity, competence, and humility are foundational components to effective and impactful prevention services. COVID-19's exposure of racial disparities in our health outcomes and the tragic killing of unarmed Black men and women have made equity, diversity, cultural competence, and cultural humility the topic of conversations at both the micro and macro level. In May of 2021, Prevention Action Alliance hosted its second Prevention Action and Advocacy Summit. And in the spring, the focus of that summit was racism, and we purposely brought state and national speakers together with prevention specialists from 8 states to begin a conversation of racism and prevention, culturally competent prevention. The goal of the conference was to provide Ohio prevention field professionals, community stakeholders, and partners a space to have conversations, to be instructed, and to share resources and information that can be utilized to build relationships, to have conversations and exact change in their localities and personal lives. It was a good day, and it underscored the importance of ongoing conversation, sharing emerging and valuable resources, and illustrating best practices. So I look forward to today's summit. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you today, and thank you for inviting us. Next slide, sir.
So we like to, as I mentioned, we are practitioners, and we like to kind of give everybody a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. starting with our learning objectives, some agreements, and Fran just did some wonderful introductions. We're going to do some activities. So our conversation with you all today, and we like to phrase it that way, is it's a conversation. So there's going to be some activity and some engagement, which if this morning's workshops were any indication, that shouldn't be a problem. And that's exciting for us. Then we're going to talk about some prevention stuff, the connection that prevention has to racism. And then we're going to close our session out with some resources and supports. So we're excited to have this conversation. So Fran, I say let's start, right?
I think so. So
we have a couple learning objectives. It's quite simple, but also in depth at the same time. So we're going to describe some principles and practices of prevention science, explain how prevention science supports health equity and dismantles barriers based on race, and connect tenets of prevention with best practices for working with people of color. We're going to start off with a really fun activity. Hopefully it's really fun and engaging. We all are well aware of assumptions. We all are well aware of stereotypes, and we are all well aware of the implications that we deal with and see every day as we go through the grocery store, as we order Amazon items to be delivered, when we're in the spaces and places of worship, and everywhere else. So in the chat box, if you don't mind utilizing the chat box, help answer this question. What are stereotypes and general assumptions that people have about one another, just in general? So people are starting to respond. I'm seeing things like they can't understand, uneducated. There's a superiority, there's laziness, ignorance, social economics. What do we think about assumptions based on working specifically with people of color? So in the space of working, and that could mean as coworkers, or that could be as clients or colleagues, other professionals that you might work with in your day in and day out. Again, we've got some repeats. Asia Street Smart, that's a really interesting addition to our discussion. As if street smart should be considered a bad thing, but I don't know about you, but I wish I was more street smart. That people can represent the voice of all BIPOC individuals. Thank you, Kara, for that. That goes along with that tokenism comment, where one person is the representative for all people. These are all assumptions and stereotypes that affect everybody as you're walking through life and as you're engaging with different community sectors and individuals, whether in a personal situation or a professional situation. And they affect every single person on the planet, whether you are the recipient of such assumptions and stereotypes, or whether you're the perpetrator. Everybody has a role and everybody plays a part in this. And one of the things that we're going to touch on today, and one of the things that I would encourage you to take with you from this conversation, is the idea of being an upstander. If you're not familiar with the term, in prevention, we utilize the upstander concept to be that person who stands up for what is right, regardless of the situation and regardless of the circumstance. Obviously, we never want to put ourselves or find ourselves in a dangerous or harmful situation, but you and I both know that we have people that we work with, that we call neighbors and friends and family, that deal with life-threatening issues every day, all day. So I would encourage you in the safest way as possible, but to be an upstander, anytime you see stereotypes happening, discrimination or prejudice, be able to stand with that person who is being attacked, being able to stand with that person who is being diminished in any way by other people. One, it allows that person to not feel alone. It allows that person to recognize and understand who their allies are. But it also helps to dismantle this idea that everybody has the same opinions and everybody carries the same assumptions. I'm a big believer. I oftentimes say that as a Caucasian individual, I'm Frosty the Snowman white. So when we talk about racism and we talk about the experiences that other people who are not Caucasian experience, my initial answer is always, well, if I stand with those folks, then the other people who look like me will start to get the understanding and start to get the hint that they are the ones that are in the wrong when we talk about racist behavior. And I have a responsibility to be an upstander. So as we move through that conversation, thank you again, everybody, for the wonderful input and chat box conversations. I really appreciate those.
So, unfortunately, racism impacts all people. And when we were doing this exercise, I was thinking to myself, I could easily insert Native American, Asian American into, people of color, or suburban Americans or inner city Americans. And, the reality is these adjectives are not accurate of any race or geographic situation or demographic classification. So the question really becomes then, how do we move from stereotypes to collective impact and to understanding? So prevention science is what Bobby and I would suggest is the way. The Institute of Medicine defines prevention science as a multidisciplinary field devoted to the scientific study of the theory, research, and practice related to the prevention of social, physical, and mental health problems, including causation, epidemiology, and intervention. And in 2011, the National Prevention Strategy was released, and it provided a guide for the nation to the most effective and achievable means for improving health and well-being. This strategy prioritized prevention by integrating recommendations and actions across multiple settings to improve health and to save lives. So over the past 50 years, prevention has changed from the use of scare tactics. So think about way back, maybe when you were a teenager like me, this is your brain on drugs. It's the egg in the frying pan. We have quickly learned that was not a best practice. And we moved from information and education programs like DARE and Just Say No to a more scientific-based approach, which includes effective education, partnerships, and replicating research-based models and research-based approaches. So with that, there are some commonalities, though. We all have a common understanding of what prevention is. And as public health officials, you do prevention all the time. You're preventing diseases like COVID. You're preventing accidents and falls. You work to prevent violence. Prevention, when we look at behavioral health, we are trying to stop and prevent substance misuse, and we're trying to promote mental health wellness. So it's a systematic approach to help individuals, families, and communities. And I really like the vision of concentric circles, because when individuals are preventing substance misuse and behavioral health and finding effective channels for communication, they're taking care of themselves, but they're also impacting the families and the networks that they work and live in. And then that has a greater impact on the community that they reside in. And so it really is a process for community change. And I will say that I think the pandemic has provided us with a really interesting opportunity to be an in-person case study when we look at the impact of prevention and when we learn to develop best practices for our field. Just recently, Ohio MOS, the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, has issued an updated strategic plan for the Office of Prevention Services. And I want to read to you what they say, because I think it is very impactful. The public health model was cited in their recently updated strategic plan. The public health model provides the foundation for prevention and includes a focus on improving the well-being of populations. Public health describes a multidisciplinary approach that engages the entire community. This model is applied in the Office of Prevention Services to reduce risk and increase protective factors that are likely to impact mental, emotional, and behavioral health disorders. And as I referenced, the 2020-2021 pandemic provided us with an opportunity to learn more about public health strategies and how each person plays a role in protecting communities from the spread of the virus. This is true for preventing mental, emotional, and behavioral health disorders. Prevention professionals guide the development and implementation of collaborative partnerships and plans for policies, programs, and services that target individuals, families, organizations, and communities. However, and I think this is the key statement, the opportunity is open and broad for everyone to play a role in prevention efforts. And so hopefully this is something that we can continue to build the bridges between prevention specialists addressing mental, emotional, and behavioral health, and the expertise that you have within the public health departments. Bobby, would you move the slide forward? We have always liked to say that public health and behavioral health are best friends because we work so very closely together. So there are some cornerstones of prevention science that we rely on heavily every day in all of our work. And of course, as in any profession, there are a good collection of acronyms. So I apologize if I slip into that speak. I'll try to be very clear in who I'm referencing, but these really are organizations that we utilize on a daily basis. So SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, really put and underscored the value of prevention when it created the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. So we call these strategies that they've issued the CSAP 6 strategies. And these are strategies that we use in all of our work: information dissemination, prevention education, alternative activities, community-based processes, environmental strategies, and problem identification and referral. Of course, prior to COVID, these all happened face-to-face or through more old-fashioned ways, perhaps, but being virtual required us to shift and to pivot. And so another organization that was created by SAMHSA are the Prevention Technology Transfer Centers, the PTTCs, and they have created a paper on moving these CSAP 6 strategies to virtual settings. And we had to be very quick and we had to pivot so that we can be responsive to the needs of individuals and communities during the pandemic. I think it has served us well, and I think it will provide us with ongoing processes as we continue to go forward in lots of different conversations. Coalitions have emerged as an effective and impactful vehicle to bring sets of organizations, diverse sets of organizations and stakeholders to the table. And again, I think Bobby and I would both underscore the importance of coalition involvement when trying to identify root causes and really be very specific to address racism, the causes of racism in individuals' communities and individual neighborhoods. Coalitions have great opportunities to bring diverse stakeholders to the table, to leverage collective resources and coordinate action across programs and really impact the greater community with very common goals. Youth development is something very near and dear to both Bobby and I. And we are just champions of all opportunities for youth development and empowerment. And it's distinct because we're helping young people develop the knowledge and skills and attitudes to become catalysts within their community and be positive change. And at the core of youth-led development, it really is engaging youth in collective activities and experiences that are intended to spark their interest and enhance their ability to address local issues. And in short, we're empowering young people to create community change, and we're providing them with the skills that they need to be effective. We're providing them with those best practices. And at the heart of all of our prevention work really is cultural competence. And it's not about just implementing a specific program or a service, but it's really about having stakeholders that are contributing and guiding that and providing us with the knowledge and resources to plan and implement something that can be transformational. When we talk about sustainability, though, I think it's really important to recognize that prevention takes time. And so when any planning happens, it's not a one and done situation. We really have to be looking to the future and really think about the capacity to produce and maintain positive prevention outcomes over time. And to do that, we have to be able to maintain programs and practices that produce the positive prevention results that we're really looking for. And then, of course, that final cornerstone, nothing about us without us. No policy, no planning, no implementation, no assessment should ever be conducted without including the people that we are trying to serve.
So as we connect prevention to racism as a problem, all of those points that Fran acknowledged and talked about, those cornerstones of the work that we do are important. The last two, probably the most important when we come to this idea as of racism as a prevention problem. So I'm loving the chats that are happening in the chat box as we're talking. That interactivity is so important to our conversation today. So I definitely appreciate that. Some really great things that I saw in there was talking about trauma. And trauma is something that we address as prevention scientists every day because issues related to substance use and mental health oftentimes either come from trauma or come with trauma. And when we talk about connecting racism as a prevention problem, that is our direct connection. When we talk about somebody who is disenfranchised, somebody who cannot receive the appropriate health or safety measures necessary for survival or existence, those are traumas. When you grow up in parts of communities and on the other side of the tracks, or in the bad part of town, there are trauma-related things that are institutional in your growing up, in your existence, in your everyday function. And the situation, as we see it as prevention scientists, is when we work to help build individuals, families, and communities, we address with the work that we do that cultural understanding of the situation. All of those wonderful things that you were putting in the box, and by wonderful, I mean your answers were great. The core of the answers, unfortunately, are horrible, but the great answers that you were giving are things that we address all the time, and it's something that we work with and work for to try to help build all of our communities up and equalize everything that's happening not only in Columbus, but across Ohio. So some of those impacts that we see on a regular basis, that we experience on a regular basis as we work with professionals across the state. The first one is obviously lack of resources. We understand and we recognize, and one of the things that we talked about last spring with our summit, after we made the proclamation to the state that we were going to prioritize this question and how we can support communities across the state in equity and inclusivity, was lack of resources. We understand and we know that there are spaces and places across the city and across the state that do not receive equitable resources in the way of support for food, in the way of support for healthcare, and obviously, as we are experiencing nationwide, the implications of the difficulties between law enforcement and people of color. Those issues not only affect those obvious responses, but they walk away, people who walk away from those situations walk away with a higher level of trauma that then articulates itself throughout other facets of life. That pressure to not be able to make rent, that pressure to not be able to eat healthfully, and that opportunity to not be able to live comfortably in who you are and what you think, how you look, and what you believe in, is obviously detrimental to all facets of survival. We also obviously have to talk about access and availability. If we live in parts of the community that does not have access to healthy foods, like food deserts, if we live in places or spaces where healthcare practitioners, not unlike yourselves, aren't able to get to folks to address health issues, whether they be chronic or whether they be immediate, and the availability of proper health, wellness, and safety concepts or cornerstones of health, wellness, and safety make it very difficult and perpetuate the idea and the concept that people are lesser than, or they're not good as, or good enough as, or that they're just simply different. The one thing about this second box, though, that we like to focus on and talk about is honestly the engagement. As we mentioned earlier in the conversation, you know, our focus is to promote that engagement and to be able to say, you know, take it into the communities that are not being served appropriately, to be able to engage with those folks who are treated unfairly, who are treated disrespectfully, and not only so that they receive the services, but also so that we are supporting their health and well-being by saying that they have safety supports and networks to engage them at the level and meet them where they are. One of the things that we promote strongly with prevention, as Fran mentioned, and it's a cornerstone, is that whole concept of not about us, without us. We genuinely, as prevention practitioners, do not ever discuss concepts or circumstances without the individuals who are directly impacted. And earlier this morning, I heard some of the CPH staff talking about, I think it was Dr. Roberts actually talking about the impacts that you all have made since the COVID pandemic began to do that engagement. And that's part of the reason why we are happy to live on the same family tree professionally as public health specialists. But it's one of the things that we work with the public health departments across the county and the state to try to help promote and engage. Being able to understand underserved communities is paramount in addressing racism within the state. We have to be able to understand not only from a professional perspective, but we also have to understand it from a human perspective. Sometimes I think, sadly, people forget that human beings are just that, they're human beings. And at the end of the day, we should all have this mentality and the idea that looking at another person for the honesty and the integrity of them being a human being is motivation to do right by them. And if we have folks, as we have folks, who maybe don't see it that way, or maybe don't agree with that concept, it's our part and our role, and it falls to us, everybody on this call, all 260 some of us, to not only be reminding others of that, but be examples of that.
We have about 7 minutes left, by the way.
Thank you, Todd. And then obviously the impacts of racism, as we've talked about, have affects health and well-being, period. And we kind of hit on that a couple times, so I won't belabor the part. So let's talk about stereotypes as actions, right? I think I'm having a delay on the slide. There we go. So we're going to go back to our chat box. You all are still having great conversations there as well, so let's keep it up. How does racism show up within communities across Columbus? Redlining, thank you. Common era schools within the education systems, underfunded school buildings, not being aware of actions, driving while Black, policing, food apartheids, walking while Black, issues with maternal health and well-being, redistricting. Somebody said they don't live in Columbus, but in Arkansas, that's a problem. It's a problem here too. Infant mortality, negative media exploitation, deserts in the neighborhoods. I'm assuming you mean food deserts or health deserts. Not having people of color as representatives in education. Tax abatements, gerrymandering. Different zonings. When we talk about policy and practice throughout our communities, zoning policies are very important, and a lot of people don't pay attention to those, because if you have different zonings, restrictions, or there are certain areas in communities that have high incidence of liquor licenses, that's an indicator that that community might either have or become a part of town that has high levels of alcoholism or alcohol use disorders. White flight, under construction or poor development of infrastructure and buildings. Treatment deserts for opioid issues. Renee, I like undesirable city features. Also, employment opportunities. If there are communities and neighborhoods, and we understand that communities of color oftentimes are not supported with business growth, either by individuals who are trying to start businesses or individuals who want to bring businesses to those neighborhoods. They don't get the same benefits, they don't get the same expectations, and they don't have the same supports as businesses or potential businesses in white neighborhoods. Thank you for saying that, Asia, that even Kroger's looks different in urban areas than it does in suburban or rural areas. These are the actions that we have to engage individuals and communities and community leaders on. Being able to work within the current structure is a necessary evil because it is the current structure. But we are going through, as we wake up every day, all of us, we are currently in the beginnings of a transitional time in our state and in our country when it comes to social inequities, when it comes to being able to engage with necessary privileges. I don't know what else to call them. You know, when we have to consider eating a privilege, maybe that in and of itself is a racist concept. When we have to think of basic safety, or when we have to think of somebody feeling uncomfortable going to see a counselor or a doctor, or even walking into the health department, you know, there's stigmas associated with those types of things, as we have had our conversation this afternoon.
I mean, I want to say that Allison has just made a really important comment. Do you mind if I read it from the chat?
Please.
It says, if we are here to talk about prevention, should we not also be spending our time thinking about assets in communities impacted by racism? Yes, ma'am. And you have provided a great segue because core to the prevention work really is assessing risk and protective factors in culturally appropriate ways, and really cultivating the 40 developmental assets in all communities. So Allison, you're one of us. Thank you.
When we talk about those, we were talking about those basic needs. And as Fran mentioned, the Search Institute, if you're not familiar, the Search Institute has the 40 developmental assets that talk about helping young people to be the most successful. Within prevention science, we have a lot of theories and practices, and we've talked about a lot of them this morning. We just haven't named them, so I want to take the time to do that as well. When we talk about risk and protective factors, so we had mentioned stuff like those food deserts, we would consider those a risk factor when we talk about racism as we work through it through the prevention lens. When we talk about things like ineffective healthcare or medical treatment, those would be risk factors for individuals to continue to feel traumatized or to be traumatized in their everyday interactions and functions. And we talk about things like high substance use. We talk about low treatment opportunities. Those would all be considered risk factors. As we look at protective factors and obviously counterbalancing those negative experiences, they're no different than the risk and protective factors that you all probably think about and talk about and work with every day. Being able to increase experiences, being able to support different individuals or races within the larger Columbus community would be a protective factor. So acknowledging and supporting cultural norms that promote a feeling of safety, that promote a feeling of understanding, being able to support individuals as they achieve higher levels of education, as they achieve higher levels of employment, as they attempt to build businesses, and being able to own and operate their lives as they understand it and see it would be considered a protective factor. When we talk about the practical application piece of it, that's where the real work happens. That's conversations like today, but more importantly, the work that's going to come from conversations like today. We have spoken all year long about this idea of these conversations are the catalysts for change, but the change comes in the practical application and the work that's done outside of the conversations. Being able to step into those communities and being able to empower and support those folks who are disenfranchised, being able to show them that they have not only allies, but accomplices in their livelihoods and in their well-beings. That's where we really will see community change take shape. And that's where we will start to see the dismantling of these unfair, irresponsible, and racist constructs that we all walk in and out of every day.
Bobby, Renee said something in the chat that I think is just a very nice closure to this conversation that we're having. You know, we really don't need to fix things for people. What we need to do is empower them and provide them with the confidence, the tools that they need to identify what those root problems are, what the causes are. Why is it happening here? Why is it happening now? And then put the strategies that we know work and cultivate and adapt those strategies to be the most impactful for that community. Prevention is not a cookie cutter technique. It is not a cookie cutter practice. It is something that has to be customized for every community. And I thank you, Renee, for pointing that out, because that is so very true. The success of prevention is that we have a framework, that we have a science. And the benefit of this, another success of this, is that it is able to be adaptable and customizable. And I think that's what makes it so impactful and so relevant to this conversation.
Absolutely. And I think, it's so exciting to be able to join you all today and have this conversation and discussion together. And as we've attempted to make connections between prevention science and public health. You all have been an active participant in that, and we are grateful and thankful. I think we're probably just about at time, if not maybe even a little over. I tend to talk a lot, y'all. So we can go into the wrap-up conversation and say thank you so much for allowing us to join you today, for allowing us to be a part of your discussion and the work that you're doing. And obviously our contact information is there, and I can speak comfortably for our entire team when I say we are willing partners, not only in this conversation, but in the work that we're doing independently of each other and collectively with one another. So thank you again for inviting us to your conversation today.
So before we head into the rooms, Makita, if you wanted to facilitate, I think we should offer at least time for one question, if we can manage that.
Yes, and we had a few questions in the chat. So one of them was really focused around the beginning exercise. So asking the question, when we do these sorts of exercises, how do these stereotypes prevent us from seeing the humanity in each other and listening? You know, a lot of times when we use these sorts of language, these stereotypes, people can shut down pretty easily. So how do we unpack privilege for white people, and how do we prevent reinforcing pain and trauma by using these terms?
That's a great question. It's a large question. So Amanda, help me if I miss a portion of it. I would say, first of all, unpacking the concept of white privilege. I don't want to be a spokesperson for all things and all people, but at this juncture in our history, I would say that we have to simply enter situations where understanding privilege is just a fact of life. Although there are always going to be people who do not understand privilege or who do not claim their privilege, I think it goes back to that experience of being able to see it and be an upstander in the situation as we recognize that privilege is being utilized. Being able to call it out, being able to say, hey, wait a second, I don't understand what you're saying, or we have a program here that we use, and we're in conversations with Jaleesa and Makeda to bring it maybe to some of the staff at CPH, called Ouch, That Stereotype Hurts, where you literally say the words, ouch, that hurt, when somebody is speaking in a privileged tone, when somebody is not understanding or recognizing that the place and space that they come from is not the same for everybody. I also think that when we talk about the trauma that is associated for people of color by stereotypes, by discrimination, and by prejudicial behaviors and actions that take place in life every day, all day long, we as practitioners of prevention and public health, we as good citizens of the great city of Columbus, and if I could be a little universal, we as human beings have a right to and a responsibility to recognize that these words have created trauma, not for days, not for months, but for lifetimes. That there are people who sit in cubicles next to us, that there are people who sit in pews next to us at church, that there are people in our neighborhoods and our communities every day who have been traumatized by these experiences. And we have a responsibility as human beings to address it. I touched upon it earlier when we talked about, being that upstander, and there are situations that are extremely uncomfortable, but we have to overcome that discomfort, and we have to be willing to dare I say it, feel uncomfortable ourselves. And when I say we, I'm talking about people like me, because we have to be able to understand that the world is not rose-colored when it's whitewashed. I don't know if that was too flippant, but it's true.
I think these conversations too require you to be very astute as to the audience that you're talking to. And it very much, you may find yourself having to do a lot of development. I think that, there's education that needs to happen. I think you have to come to consensus. And I think it's not a one and done conversation, obviously. It has to be ongoing and regular. And I just would say you have to know your audience and set parameters. And I think what, the speaker this morning said, and Bobby said that too, you've got to be uncomfortable. You've got to be comfortable with that uncomfortableness, or we're never going to make progress.
That was a great question, whoever asked.
Yes.
Absolutely. So thank you. I think we're going to
speak here.
We're going to move into our breakout portion. And we talked about stereotypes, and Dr. Fullilove spoke about intention. And so just thinking about, how do we use intention to reframe our perspectives? How do we adjust our frames to impact the work that we're doing? To move with intention as we address systemic racism in our lives, and more specifically in the systems that we all work in. So we have an opportunity now to continue our conversations in our breakout sessions with our same groups. You'll see the invitation pop up, and we ask that you accept those invitations. Our facilitators will lead discussion, but we ask only that the facilitators access the Jamboard. So there's a limited number of people who can be in there at the same time, and we do need the facilitators to be able to access the Jamboard. So we ask that only those folks do that, and we appreciate that. And then we'll see you back here in a quick 30 minutes to share out highlights from all the conversations. Thanks so much.
Hello again. Unfortunately, Bobby's computer has had some technical challenges, so he is logging off and logging in again, and hopefully he'll be able to join us. During this breakout session, we had some conversation with the planning committee, and I certainly want to acknowledge some of the uncomfortable feelings and perhaps some triggers that were created during that last activity. It was not our intent to underscore or add to anyone's trauma. These conversations are hard. And as I was going back through some of the chat, uncomfortableness is a reality when we are talking about racism. The unfortunate consequence of doing virtual presentations like this is that I can't read the room and I can't see faces. So on behalf of Bobby and myself, we do apologize if that last activity went too long or was not as effective as we intended it. So again, we appreciate your comments. We appreciate you sharing that with us. And certainly it is feedback that we needed to have. So thank you for that. I've been quickly scanning some of the comments to the first question. How do you identify your privilege? How could your experiences and upbringing influence how you speak to decision makers about challenges that your racially and ethnically diverse clients face? I concur with everything that I am seeing. I'm wondering if there's a facilitator who would like to report out on behalf of their room.
Yes, two of them have their hands raised.
Yes, I see a
You know
hand
what? I
up.
cannot see those on my screen, so I guess I misspoke.
So we have Debbie with her hand up and Randy.
I already said what I needed to say. I'm just putting information in the chat right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Debbie. Randy, you can go ahead.
Okay, my group talked about unlearning the experience, that's some of the experiences that you learned when you were younger. For example, one of the participants spoke to the fact that they lived in predominantly white areas and learned some things, and then they had to remove themselves in order to not be reminded of the privileges they had. And so that was a key thought on this question.
You know, I think that's really important, Randy, because none of us have control of our upbringing. You know, we are sponges as children. We absorb what we are exposed to, and that colors our perspectives, that shapes our reactions to things. And I guess I just I agree with you 100% when you say that. And that's hard work. I think we would all agree that having to unlearn some of those things is hard work, but I know that it's possible because I've done it myself personally. I've seen my family do it. I've seen other people that I work with do it. So I think that's a very good reminder. I think it's something intentionally that we all have to practice. Randy, I have a follow-up question to you. Did your group have any practical suggestions on how to do that unlearning? Oops, you're still muted.
Okay, well, the most important thing that I picked up on is they were saying taking yourselves out of those situations. So if, in other words, if you always do what you've always done and recognizing those privileges that you have been afforded and learning to remove yourself out of that. Maybe not hanging around the same people, not intentionally taking yourself out of those learned negative habits.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think those are really good suggestions.
All right, thank you so much, Randy. We have Elizabeth with her hand up.
All right, so speaking for group number 12, we had some really good conversation. One of the key highlights I think needs brought up is that sometimes it can be uncomfortable when we're advocating for people who are close to us rather than broader groups, because it can seem like you're advocating for yourself. So we had the conversation of, yes, it's important to speak for decision makers or speak to decision makers about the community you represent. But sometimes, especially as women, it seems like you're advocating for yourself. So you want to be really careful not to seem like you're advocating for yourself and instead seem like you're advocating for the rest of the group. So we had an interesting conversation about how tricky it can be as a woman to be able to speak for yourself or for people who are close to you, and how sometimes it can be challenging when you're having those conversations.
So that's a really interesting thought, because, you know, as professionals, we sometimes look different from the groups that we're representing, or we look the same. And so did you all have any practical suggestions on how to do that?
One of the suggestions was that if you can, for example, if you are an immigrant from a specific community, and instead of advocating for that specific community, such as Somalia was the example brought up, then you could advocate for immigrants in general. Being able to advocate for the general group rather than that specific group can sometimes feel more comfortable and be more effective when talking with different decision makers.
I think it's a fair point. Thank you for sharing that. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about as I was kind of scanning the jam box here, or the jam board, is that a lot of times we expect community members to be able to be advocates without actually helping them understand what the process is, what the protocols are, and it's not an inherent process. So I think we always have to make sure that when we're working with with community advocates, that we're helping them understand the words to use, the tone to use, the protocols, so that they can feel confident and they can feel successful. So I think that's very good.
Great. And our next hand is up by Octavia.
Good morning. I just wanted to share what my group said because they had very good insight. It was a diverse group. It was mainly women, but they had all good thoughts. So on question one, just being multiracial is a privilege. And sometimes when you look at what group or what community you belong to, that can be a privilege or a hindrance. It just depends on the lens that you're looking at it. Some women of color didn't think that they had privilege, but you know, when you think about it, education, home, or the community you live in can be a privilege. Even healthcare, and so the group also said not taking action and taking action and inviting people to interact will help. And then also, we also talked about tokenism.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said chameleonism. That was new. Some women didn't see themselves as trailblazers, but just being in your work setting, but not being able to have input on hiring or budgeting or anything like that in your work. And then having to get that education and being able to sit at that table to make those decisions really helped a lot. So they saw that they are somewhat of a trailblazer in doing that. And then especially ensuring that culturally competent strategies are used and not cookie cutter approaches. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
We got about
Thank
5
you.
minutes left in this segment.
I think those are all very good points. And really one of the things that we truly reinforce over and over and make sure that we make available to everyone that we work with at Prevention Action Alliance is that regardless of who applies for grants, regardless of who we are working with, that we're providing them with the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that they need to be successful. And it doesn't look the same for each organization, each community, or each individual that we work with. We really do have to customize it. So I appreciate those comments, Octavia.
All right, and with our remaining time, if we could just go to question 2. I see Tara has her hand up.
Okay, so
Okay.
question 2.
Okay. So one of the things that my group brought up, sorry, I'll start my video. Okay. One of the things we brought up for question 2 was, let's see if what's manifested in the workplace. Oh, so we found treating non-English speakers as though they are dumb. People experiencing different political views within the workplace and feeling very much a minority in that way and afraid to express their views. The hiring and promotional aspects within a workplace were places that we have felt discriminated against. And then someone expressed that as a person of color, they had expressed ideas or given comments and they were kind of overlooked. And then someone else would restate that basic idea or comment and it would be promoted and celebrated. So kind of the sparkle is only given to Caucasian statements. So those were some of the most powerful ones that I remember. I'll pass it along to the next person.
You know, that's really frustrating to hear. And I appreciate those comments because I think that's unfortunate. I think, you know, we have to be willing as organizations and agencies to do the work internally as well as what we project externally. And I know that there are very specific things that we're working on here at Prevention Action Alliance to make sure that our policies are fair and equitable, to make sure that the language that we use resonates with everyone. The class standards really help guide that work. And it's, you know, it's labor intensive, but it's worthy labor, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so many of the things that Tara, that you were expressing and sharing, that's really disappointing. And I would encourage those people to have really hard conversations, perhaps with leadership of their organizations, because that doesn't cultivate the inclusivity that I think probably all of our organizations, all of our offices really want to cultivate or to project. Yeah, it's hard work, and it's big work.
Agreed. Thank you. Dawn Wise? You're muted, Dawn.
Yes, I was going to say we had some of the same discussions in our group, but one thing that I thought was unique for the second question was one of the ladies expressed that in her workplace, she was trying to advocate for others that had experienced racism, and because those persons were so tired of the day-to-day offenses and were so overwhelmed and felt like they did not have a voice. This person said that she was trying to advocate for them and how hard that was, and she was fighting. She's advocating for others, and so she was trying to figure out, so what do you do in those situations? And I don't know if we came to a conclusion, but we all had experienced that type of situation where, as Dr. Fuller said this morning, when you talk about communication, it's about power. So if you're having to deal with people who are your bosses and your superiors, how do you do that? Coming when it's an incident like the aforementioned one about not being heard when you made the same suggestion and were passed over. Oh, that wasn't racism. I didn't know you said that. Well, how I perceived it was you passed over me because of my race when somebody else says it. And it is accepted.
You know, it sounds like that person was being an upstander for her colleague or his colleague. And, you know, I think that's admirable and should be applauded, because it's kind of like the quote that was being shown by Dr. King this morning. You know, it's the apathy of the good people not saying what needs to be said. So these are all, unfortunately, systemic experiences of racism that we are seeing in our workplace. But I think these conversations are important. And I think having these conversations within your workplace are important. And I fully acknowledge that those conversations come with risk at a time.
Thank you. Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Bobby, for helping us to summarize the great conversations that took place in those breakout rooms. We're going to go ahead and transition to our closing. And so we have another 1 minute poll that we will launch, and the questions are going to look very, very familiar to you. It is a pre and a post test. So Donnie, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and launching that poll. So the questions: having attended this summit, how confident are you in using key terms to effectively talk about racial equity? Not at all, not very, somewhat, and very. The second question is, having attended this summit, how confident are you in your ability to use appropriate verbal responses in situations that challenge racial equity? And the same response options. And then our third question, having attended this summit, how confident are you in discussing the importance of having the right language to discuss racial inequity? All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll. All right. So when it comes to using key terms to effectively talk about racial equity, looks like we've seen a roughly a 14% increase in that. And having attended this summit, how confident are you in your ability to use appropriate verbal responses? About a third of participants have increased in that ability. And then for discussing the importance of having the right language to discuss racial inequity, about a third of our participants as well. So thank you so much for completing that. You will have another opportunity to share with us if you believe that the objectives were met, and to share with us what you've learned as well. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Sue Ellen so she can share that experience with you.
Well, first, thank you so much to the presenters, and thank you to all the participants for spending your morning and the first part of your afternoon with us, and for all the valuable discussions that took place. I am the executive officer for the Center for Public Health Innovation that Dr. Roberts created to address health inequities, which means we're really explicitly trying to dismantle racism as it is a root cause of these preventable and unjust differences in health outcomes that we see. I thought the discussions were really interesting today. I'm going to quote Casey Rogers, who's the co-president of the Multicultural Public Health Student Association at OSU. She was talking about how these conversations are heavy. They can bring up a lot of feelings, but what do we do with those feelings? And how can we use that in our work to address racial inequities? And if there's anything I take away today, it's that language really has impact. And how do we mindfully engage in conversation? How do we do what Dr. Fullilove talked about in listening, opening the bowl of your listening? You can't understand the experience of another person if you aren't listening with empathy and compassion. I thought the point of understanding place, what is the history of racism here? What are the policies that have been put in place in Columbus that have led to the outcomes that we see? Because if we don't know that, we can't explicitly challenge those policies to advance equity in our community. I also want to remind you to fill out our evaluation. I think there's a slide coming up with that. There's a QR code. We really need your feedback so that we know how to improve what we're doing, to make sure that we're offering content that you all find valuable and interesting. I know it's been a real learning experience for me today, and we thank you so much for participating. And now I'm going to pass off to my colleague and friend, Jennifer Beard, the Assistant Dean of The Ohio State University College of Public Health.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know that I stand between most of us and our lunch, so I will be brief in my comments and just say thank you to each of you for engaging in this conversation and seeking to enhance your capacity to talk the talk. It's critical that we all take on the responsibility of doing so. I want to issue a call to action and invite us to each now consider ourselves qualified and prepared to be catalysts in both our professional and our personal networks to talk the talk. We won't be perfect in our efforts, but if we're mindful of our own privilege, as well as taking a trauma-informed approach to those that we're talking to and working on behalf of, we will be better able to move the needle toward greater equity. And if not us, then who? I do want to remind everyone that this collaboration between the College of Public Health and Columbus Public Health is ongoing, and we are continuing to work to bring opportunities such as this next year. Now that we've explored talking the talk, we will talk about walking the walk. So we look forward to connecting with you again. We'll also be sharing with you additional opportunities Specifically coming up this month on November 17th, the College of Public Health will be engaging in a conversation around policing in our community in Central Ohio. So you will receive some additional information about that. Thank you to all the presenters and to the fantastic committee that put this together from Columbus Public Health and the College of Public Health. As a reminder, you may reach out to Jaleesa regarding any questions you have regarding your CEs. I did put her contact information in the chat. And that's it for us. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you.
Telling these tears go and fall away, fall away. Oh, may the last one burn into flame.